I'm Glyn Lewis. I'm Professor of Epidemiological Psychiatry in the UCL Division of Psychiatry. I'm a psychiatrist, and as well as working clinically, I carry out research in people with depression. One of the important questions is, what do we know about what might cause depression in the first place? Of course, depression isn't a 0-1 thing. There's a whole continuum of severity of depression, right from people with no symptoms at all to people who are very severely affected. And in population terms, there are many people who have significant mental health problems who don't necessarily meet the diagnostic criteria for depression. But we generally assume that there isn't any real difference between those people, very in terms of causation, for those people who are very severely affected and those people who might be less severely affected. If we look at what might cause depression, the usual way is to look longitudinally at populations who are not unwell at the time but then become ill. And for depression, it's important then to start quite early on in life. About probably 3/4 of people who have adult problems with depression and anxiety have had mental health problems as a teenager. And there's a big increase in the incidence of depression during the teenage years. At 10, depression is fairly uncommon, but by 18, the prevalence of depression is the same as you would expect in adults. So if you go back to earlier in development, before adolescence, the sort of things which seem to increase risk can be put under mostly the heading of stressors. Bad things that happen to people, poverty, traumatic experiences, child abuse, bullying in school. All these things seem to increase the risk. And of course, there is a great deal of variation in how people respond to such stressors. And there are also some theories and some evidence for how people might vary. Indeed, one of the leading theories is about how people might learn to interpret the world. So I'll just give a quick example of that. For example, somebody might be brought up in a household where perhaps there are very high standards, and if they don't do everything perfectly, they're criticised or something like that. So they might learn, well, if I don't do things perfectly, I'm a bit useless. And they might go through school fine and pass lots of exams and do very well, but at some point in their life they're going to fail an exam or something, perhaps which doesn't turn out as they would have hoped. And you might imagine somebody like that would react more strongly to life events such as failing an exam than somebody who was brought up in perhaps a more laissez-faire, less perfectionistic household. And there is evidence that this does happen, and clinically indeed we often see this, that early experiences in life and the environments that people are exposed to in childhood and early and even late adolescence often have an impact on how stressful things happening later in life affect them. And this is one of the leading theories about why depression might occur in some individuals. Of course, depression is a multifactorial condition. There are going to be lots of other things which cause depression. For example, there are genes. Our genetic makeup can affect risk. There's also interest in things like so-called inflammatory markers. These are the sort of background level of inflammation in the body, which seems to increase risk as well. So this is only part of a multifactorial influence on the occurrence of depression.